Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here at Chehalem Winery with Katie Santora. It's March 15th, 2019. And Katie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for coming.
We're going to start by asking you why wine?
That is a great question, and I don't think it's a very, well, everyone has their own story why wine, but my story getting into wine, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. So obviously not a ton of wineries in Utah, even though there are, I think, 3 or 4 now, so a couple in Moab. But what happened is that I wanted to leave Utah to go to college and didn't necessarily know what I wanted to study. And so I went to the University of Oregon actually for my freshman year and didn't find anything that I was really passionate about. I made great friends, but no like best friends, so didn't have anyone I wanted to live with sophomore year. And then my great friends from Utah went to a community college in Southern California, and I was like, you know, I should just go live with my best friends and play soccer down there and try and get in-state tuition, and California is huge, so hopefully down the road a passion will come up and then I'll be able to get in-state and go to the school that I want to go to. Mm-hmm. Between those summers, I was back in Utah, and my dad's really good friend was in the kitchen with us, and he was like, you know, grilling me as a 19-year-old on like, what are you doing with your life? Like, you're moving to another school, you're going to community college, what's that all about? And he was like, you know what you should study? He said, you should study winemaking. I went to UC Davis for nursing school, and they have a great winemaking program. And I kind of laughed at him and said, no one does that, and that's not taken seriously. And then for whatever reason, really didn't know what I wanted to study, so looked into what the program entailed. And it was extremely science-based, which I excelled in general, but didn't want to commit to being a doctor and didn't want to be in a lab as a scientist. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe this could work in the beginning and I could use it to travel and have all these generals out of the way for science, that maybe in like 5 years, if it doesn't work out, I can not start over, but then, you know, continue on whatever journey was next. But anyway, through that process, I was able to get into school at UC Davis, and I loved the program, and it was very science-based, but then went kind of traveling around the world and worked in New Zealand and Australia and California and Oregon. In '08 was my first vintage in Oregon, and I think just the balance between the science and nature and being able to see the seasons is so special while having that kind of balance, that's what's kind of kept me around in wine. And then just in Oregon in general, I feel very lucky to call this place, or I found this place home, because the industry here seems so collaborative and inclusive, that really only, I think, helps at least my view on why I want to stay in an industry, because it has all the things that I need as a person. You know, science, it challenges me and always questions all the science questions that I have. But I get to be about a part of the seasons and growing and nature and all that. But then as an industry, anything that I question, I feel very comfortable and confident that I can ask our peers, and everyone really wants Oregon to succeed. And so it's really inclusive and not like other places that seem very like we are the best winery in the world. It seems like we're all in this kind of together to show the world that Oregon has great wine. So it was kind of a journey of why wine. You know, that's like not an easy, that was a long answer to probably an easy question, but I'm sure like a lot of people say with wine, once you start learning more and more, it's this like never-ending rabbit hole where you are like, oh, I've got it, and then it just keeps going. And I think that's kind of why wine for me. It's never just one thing. It changes as the year changes.
Sure. Was there a moment at UC Davis when you thought this is something you wanted to do long term and not just as a kind of an entry into science while you figured yourself out?
No, Davis was, I would say, I feel very privileged and lucky, and they have amazing teachers, but it is very, very science-based, so very academic. I think it happened more when I had some really difficult harvests in other places with that really challenge you as a person. I find that difficulties, at least in my life, that's where I come out once they're over on the other side and go, wow, I learned this about myself, or I learned that I really like this about life. And there were a couple of vintages in particular that really pushed me to my physical, emotional, mental, capacities that just felt really impossible. And coming out on the other side, you really find these valuable treasures, whether it, when I was pruning in Australia and it rains on you, but I've never felt closer to the seasons and how the earth kind of evolves all together because you're just in it every day. Or it's, those super long vintages, but you make amazing friendships that you would never be able to make as adults. It's really hard to find friends as adults, and when you go through something that's as trying with people, you have these relationships that last forever. And those are, I think, the moments that keep me inspired and wanting to do it. School was kind of my gateway into it, and I'm extremely grateful for it. But the thing that kept me or put the hooks into me were those really trying times to learn more and try and become, whoever I'm supposed to be out there.
When you were deciding that you wanted to travel and do harvests in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, how did you decide where to go, and how did you make it happen?
So my first vintage was in California, and that was pretty simple because of school. There was a ton of contacts with the university, and so that was pretty easy going to California and seeing what the California industry had. And then with New Zealand, it's a lot of the industry is contacts or who people know. I find that even on our end, when interns come to us, if someone that we've worked with has recommended them, they almost have a pass in because someone else is vouching for how hard they work, even if they're really green or don't know the industry well. If a friend is vouching for them, it's easy to be come on in, we got you, because we take that person. So there were a couple of vintages that were like that, in New Zealand for sure. And then in Oregon, it was the same, word of mouth, knowing someone. I had actually worked a vintage in California, my second one in California, and it was a bit earlier in '08 and ended a bit earlier, and so I was able to leave and then come up here because '08 was a later vintage in Oregon, and so came here and worked almost a double vintage, which is insane, and I would not recommend it to anyone ever, but it worked out, and just loved the vintage here. But that was word of mouth of being a friend saying, I think this winery could use an extra person. They've already started, but since you're kind of already in it, I can talk to them and see if you can come up, and it worked out. I think the only really lucky, just kind of passing my resume on and hoping that it worked out, was the vintage I did in Australia. And it was just, I heard of the area in Margaret River and how amazing and beautiful it was, and I was I want to go there, and just blasted my email out and really didn't hear from many places except for one, and then it worked out. So it's lucky. It's kind of a toss in the ring, but I would say a lot of it is who you know.
So when you got out of school, you had some experience in the field already. You had your education. What were your sort of expectations as you entered the wine industry, and then what was the reality as you sort of started getting your feet wet?
I think that's a great question. That was a long time ago. I guess I didn't know what to expect of actually working in a cellar. So much of my schooling was very academic, like I said, and so much of cellar work is so physical and a lot more, I like to call them life jacks in the world, where an accident or something happens and you have to use what, almost like a MacGyver, look around you and see what's there to help you fix it, which I enjoy, and I think is when you can actually make it work, it's very satisfying. But I don't think schooling prepared me with all the like bacteria that I used to know, and all, you know, all the scientific terms didn't prepare me for that. So it was like a twofold. The schooling now has given me the confidence and strength to always go back to my science roots, and to be able to go, you know, this fermentation we're having an issue with, like really break it down and understand on the scientific level what we're missing if it's not in the cellar. But the practical experience day to day of just like working in a winery, I think is just as valuable. And I think sometimes almost overshadowed. You know, the industry is getting more and more, if you don't have an education, it's harder to get some of the higher up roles, where I personally think if someone's worked at a vineyard or winery for many years, they know the pulse of the place, which is something you can't teach. So much of winemaking, I think, really is understanding those seasons and the cyclicalness and the minute changes that happen every year, that if you don't actually spend time seeing that and learning that, I can't tell you what it is. Like, I can't go, during this hot vintage, this is what you need to expect, because during that hot vintage, there might be really cold nights, which, you know, change it just slightly. So it's, I think it is a twofold, and that one's not better than the other, and they both really benefit each other in the end.
So once you got to Oregon, tell me about where you worked first and kind of your experiences there. Yeah.
So the 08 vintage that I came a little later, I actually worked at Rex Hill. And the community over there is just amazing, and it was a lot smaller back then, before it is now. None of the new construction and beautiful buildings are at it now. I've been able to watch across the street and be like, ooh, I knew you when, you know. But they have such an amazing group of winemakers there, with Cheryl and Sam and Michael, and their assistant winemakers at the time, that it was just an amazing experience, a great group to be able to, you know, I didn't know I wanted to stay in Oregon when I came up here, what the next step was, but after that vintage, it really was like, this is a special industry and place. So then I really did want to stay, and from word of mouth, I was able to get a cellar hand position at Domaine Serene for about a year and a half, which I worked with amazing people as well, and some of them are still some of my best friends to this day. Learned a ton, and Domaine Serene works with amazing fruit and has a spectacular facility that's beautiful and very different than ours now, but it's great to see both sides of everything. They also have a million different ferments, which really pushes your organizational skills. So as a cellar hand, my first full-time job in the wine industry, it really was pushing all those limits of like organization, keeping things separate, keeping things clean, because everything was immaculate there. It was, I'm very grateful for that first step into the industry. But then the like pulls of traveling again, like get at you. So I wanted to leave and go travel again. So I actually went back to Rex Hill for another vintage in 2010, and then went to Australia for about 10 months. And then talked to my good friend Wynn, who is one of the past owners here, and she was in need of finding an assistant winemaker, and so we were in contact, and it ended up working out that I got the position here, and so have been here ever since.
So tell me about a little bit about that process of kind of planting your roots as an assistant winemaker at a place, and how you said you knew Win, and you were in contact with her. So tell me about the process of actually like getting here and deciding this was the place for you.
I had known Win, so I went to school with Win at UC Davis. So we had a relationship as friends for 7 years before that, and I think once I had come up here and seen Oregon and really realized that I loved the wines and the industry up here, that I think I always wanted to come back. It's just the traveling aspect when you're younger is so amazing, to be able to go to these unreal places. Like, I mean, I never was able to go do a vintage in Europe, but Europe, South America, New Zealand, Australia, where you get to go and spend like 3 months in one place. There's something that it's almost ruined traveling for me, because I can't go somewhere for a week anymore, because it doesn't feel like I get the full picture of what the community is like down there. And so being a bit younger, I wanted to go do that again. But once I went to Australia for 10 months and then I went to South America, you get to a point where you're like, I'm ready to like settle down. And I think that was that next step, and going to these different places and seeing the cultures and industries, you really realize if you're going to settle down where you would want to. And so Oregon was, I think, always kind of pulling me back. And then it just, whether it was going to be an assistant winemaker or an enologist, I felt like I was ready for that next step. And so with the assistant winemaker position coming up at Chehalem, it seemed like the perfect time to kind of like go, okay, this is the time, take advantage of it and really try to go for this, which I'm extremely grateful for. I'm still here many years later.
Tell me about stepping into that role as assistant winemaker here at a kind of legendary Willamette Valley winery with Harry and Win and all that. Tell me kind of about your experiences getting into the position, getting into the role.
I always like to tell people, and even myself, that when new people start at wineries, everyone in a new job is gung-ho and they want to be the best, but the industry is like a year-long process, and so every part of the year is kind of different. So even if you are very extremely capable of every aspect, every winery does it slightly different. And so I guess I came into it hoping that my skills would be helpful to Win and Harry, but then also hoping to be quiet and humble enough to watch and learn from their years of experience in this industry, and to listen, taste with them, see what they find as very common threads through the vineyards. Chehalem is extremely lucky. We get to work with vineyards in 3 of the 6, is it 6 or 7 now? 7 now, AVAs. And because of that, we really get to see a diversity of the fruit that kind of is in the Willamette Valley. And so to really be able to sit in tastings with Win and Harry and hear, their years of experience and historical information, it was just, a huge factor of being able to build my building blocks. Oregon's going through quite the phase of implants coming to Oregon, and it's extreme in the last few years, but I was one of them. And so to not pretend that I didn't grow up here, but to really be respectful and grateful for this opportunity to come in and try and help the Chehalem legacy continue on. Whether or not I stay here forever or go somewhere else, there's always a legacy at a winery that is much before me or the person before that. Before Win, the winemaker Mike Ayers had been here for 11 years, and then Cheryl from Rex Hill was the winemaker. So there's just, once you start looking into the history of it, it's really fascinating and kind of combines, once again, everyone together, because it's not just you in that one moment. And if you can take that information to help you continue moving it on and hopefully as good or better. That's kind of the goal. So I think when I first started here, it was definitely an effort of trying to be as helpful as I can, but also take in as much as I can while, trying to see how we can fix, or not even fix, but just tweak things in different ways.
So let's talk about the sort of the transition that's happened just lately for you with Stoller purchasing Chehalem and you becoming the winemaker here. Tell me a bit about that transition and kind of did you feel you were ready? How has it been in the position since the change?
Yeah. Acquisitions are difficult no matter what, I feel like, and for good or bad or whatever it is, it's a difficult transition. It was hard seeing Harry and Win not be a part of Chehalem anymore, but also I think there are great benefits to these next moments and changes going forward. It obviously was extremely beneficial for me and, maybe right time, right place, but I do think almost watching Win and Harry and taking their information, I hope that Bill Stoller saw that same information in me with the acquisition. And so it wasn't an instant promotion. I had to prove myself and make sure that, what Chehalem was and wanted to be going forward was what the vision was now under the Stoller Wine Group. I think through those changes, everyone was trying to figure out what is the plan of this new Stoller Wine Group community and what do we want it to be. And I think through those months of figuring it out, it was really decided that we still want Chehalem to be a top tier winery with great quality. And I think because of my experience at Chehalem and my historical knowledge here and just the effort of really working really, really hard through those 9 months to prove that I wanted to stay, I was given that opportunity. So it's been great but difficult. It's a good and bad thing, but kind of going back to even the hardest parts of life and figuring out, is this right? Is this wrong? I think I've learned a lot about myself going through it. The things that were really important to me were my relationship with Win and Harry as well, and we still have a great relationship, and I cherish that extremely, and so it still validates the 6 years that I worked for them, and I hope that they can be supportive of me really taking the Chehalem name on into the future as well. So yeah, it's very exciting at the same time.
You talk about some of the kind of challenges that have arisen from this. I'm curious, what do you feel like the biggest challenge was? What was it? Was there something you weren't prepared for when you took over, when you started being the winemaker here, or was something that came out of left field, or is it just kind of evolving into the role?
I think I'm realizing it now, but it's more, Chehalem is the same, so we have the same thread here, but Chehalem is now about a part of a bigger company, the Stoller Wine Group, and so that I think was what I wasn't expecting. So it's just now being a part of more people and a bigger entity and a thing, which is great, but then it's learning how to keep the Chehalem thread as well, which I'm sure Stoller is still trying to figure out. Our new brands, canned Oregon, chemistry, all these things that are coming out. We are very, we want all these brands to have their own voice and their own thread and not to have them all be the same. And so I think as a community and a group, we all are finding what that is and hoping that those stories will be separate while being supported by the same group. So even though Chehalem is the same, it's totally different in the sense of the community that it's around. So the wines will continue to be consistent, but the behind the scenes business aspect is a lot different, which I think that was a bit more of a surprise than what I was expecting, but what I was expecting was probably very naive as well. I had never gone through anything like that, and so yeah, you can sit and sleep at night and go, this is how it's going to be tomorrow, and then it's totally different. And so yeah, it's just realizing like what I expected wasn't exactly, but that's not a bad thing. It's just learning that this new facet is great, and we have like a ton of support, and our winemaking team is a lot bigger, and we have a lot more resources in our like mind community to really make every tier that we do like as spot on as we want it to be. Does that kind of answer your question?
Very much
yeah.
does.
Okay.
I understand. Yeah, I get that. I'm curious about you took over a well-known brand name from friends. I'm curious about the pressure you feel to kind of keep that while also putting your own mark on it. You talked a little bit about it earlier, but tweaking, I think you said. How do you go about doing that while kind of paying respect to the brand at the same time?
I think Chehalem's winemaking theory in the past has been very transparent to really showcase the vineyards and not, manipulate the wine when it comes in too much. And I love that theory, and I am going to continue using that going forward. I think the tweaking part of it is more something that I find very important as an individual. Once I think someone really thinks like this is the way it's done, this is the way it has to be, that's when things become stagnant. And so it's the tweaking is more like just like always trying to look at how processes can be done a little better. If there's a way with transfer, this is a very minimal example, but transferring wine with like the least amount of oxygen as possible if we're doing it with our whites, since Chehalem is known for their aromatic whites. How do we keep those aromatics even more vibrant and in the bottle, so when you get it, so just always kind of asking these questions of what are these small things that we can do in the cellar to make it better. This comes from everyone you work with. It is from a question at a tasting that someone can just bring up and say, I was at this winery and why don't you do it this way? And then being like, that's a great question. I'm not going to be too proud to tell you, I don't know why we didn't do it that way. Let's research it and then go, actually, this is why it doesn't work for our winemaking philosophy. So I think the continuation of just transparent wines without a ton of manipulation is what I plan on continuing forward. But I'm hoping to guide and show people how to do that, but then also listen to them when they come and go, what about this? And not being too proud to not listen to them. So there's like almost maybe like the nature and science aspect coming together again.
You mentioned sort of transparent wines as kind of your kind of guiding philosophy. I'm curious how your winemaking philosophy has developed over the years. Is that something you kind of started with, or have you kind of developed into this idea of less manipulation, more natural?
That's a great question. I've never really thought of it like that. I feel like maybe I've always been drawn to places that treat their wines like that. The wineries that I've worked in New Zealand have been extremely transparent and really wanting to show the wines that they make themselves without much manipulation or additions. I definitely have worked at some big places. I worked at a harvest in South America that was just a tank farm, and I think definitely valuable in that aspect as well, knowing that that's not the direction that I want to go either. And so knowing these things is really valuable, but going to the wineries that are more about like the vineyard and where the fruit comes from, and they take the time to talk about the seasons and how that's affecting the grapes that you're getting. I always find myself more interested in it, more like compelled in those harvests, and interested in learning more about them. So whether or not I thought about it or whether or not that just was what continued to drive me. I think that's just kind of maybe the path that also was shown to me in a weird way, like just opened up to me. And yeah, I just find it very satisfying as well to know that when the season does so much of the work for you, and then I see our job as just hoping that the fruit is as good as we were able to make it in the vineyard, that we're then able to just kind of help it along its way without trying too hard to make it something it's not. And so it's almost a puzzle piece in itself without being like, we want this pH and this TA and this alcohol. It's more like the balance of the year and figuring out what works for that vintage.
So what's it been like being a young female winemaker in the Oregon wine industry?
Well, that question's come up a lot.
I'm sure it has.
And yeah, it's a great question to ask. And I feel extremely lucky to be in Oregon as a woman going through this. And not only that, but at the Solar Wine Group as a woman going through this. The Solar, just to start even on a smaller aspect, the Solar Wine Group and even Chehalem with Win and Harry has always been very, woman focused on the winemaking side of things, whether that was intentional or just was the skilled amount of workers that were there. And it didn't matter if you were a woman or a man, and those were the positions that were there. But to learn from Win, obviously, who was a woman, and then to come to this bigger company where Melissa Burr, Kate Payne Brown, Jamie is our enologist, Erica is in the vineyard, all these like strong, confident women that are a part of this company. I almost take it for granted, even though that sounds like so guilty to say, but it's just been here. And so the support has been here in this community. And then if you go even bigger, the amount of talented women that are in Oregon have been here since, the beginning, basically. So to have that amount of support is just unreal. I feel very lucky to be in this time as a young woman and hoping to continue the fight for us all being equal going forward. But there was so much work done before me that I feel like I'm kind of in this in between of being grateful and lucky, and also, without knowing it, taking advantage of where I am now because of everyone else. With that said, Oregon was it this week or last week? I think last week, about 67 women got together to talk about the Oregon industry and how things can be done better, what struggles, women have, and not any sort of bashing, like, we got to come together, but just to like be really honest about the challenges as a woman that you have. And I'm going through one of them now. I'm recently pregnant, and then thank you, but really have had a very hard time of figuring out how to then be like a mom and still be a winemaker, and how to balance that life-work relationship. And so just those questions, having a peer of people to come to and be able to be like, what do we do? Do you have to choose one over the other? How do you do a great job at both of them? I think those, as you become older, are extremely prevalent and valuable questions that need to be posed as all industries going forward, of how do we support our community that work for us while supporting their families, if that's important. But I think it's important, and I feel valuable or lucky that the Solar Wine Group also finds that important. And I think just continue trying to like make other women's lives easier and show them that we can do everything. I think it is a fine balance. Like, I'm also not under the impression that I'm as strong as a man. So there are definitely things in the cellar where if there's an intern, or my brother works in the cellar with us now full time, which I love, but I'm now realizing like I need to just be like, I can't fight through this, like ask for help. And I think there's a strength in being vulnerable and being honest about that, and for women in general, instead of seeing that as a weakness and more as just like, yeah, I can't do that, that's okay, but I can do this and this just as well, you know, or whatever that nuance is. Strength is just an obvious one. So it's a fine balance, but hoping to take this amazing position that that other women have worked for to put me in this spot to like help other people going forward. And instead of going like, it's been easy for me to continue like reaching out to other women and being like, well, you can do this. Like it stems through all industries. It's not necessarily just the wine industry. Sorry, I think I went on a little bit of a tangent there.
That's a really good answer.
Oh, thanks.
What does it mean for you for a wine to be labeled as an Oregon wine?
That also has been talked about a lot lately. And because I'm young and the history of Oregon, you know, I didn't start it. So I take a lot of pride in it because I find this place as my adult home. I grew up in Utah, and that's my home. When I say home, it's like, oh, I'm talking about Utah, but this is for definitely my adult home. And I find a lot of pride in the vines that have been here before my time. I think it's really important as the Oregon wine industry is getting more acclaimed and well-known, and wine makers and owners are coming and buying land that is still treasured. I think what makes Oregon so special is the history that it comes from. You know, the people that started the wine industry here were farmers, and they weren't millionaires. They took chance that they came here and planted vines hoping that Oregon one day would be an amazing wine region, and it is getting there. And I again feel very lucky to be here in this time where so much work has been done before me, but it's going to be this fine line of losing that thread of history and love of the land and the farmers, and I mean, we're all farmers, and going towards something that's just a wine that has Oregon labeled on it. And that probably will happen too, but it's then finding the wineries that stay consistent and true to that history and thread that will keep Oregon have its, I don't know, when I taste an Oregon wine, it just tastes like there's like a secret almost to it with other wines. Like there's a deeper meaning than just the taste. And so it's not like, oh, this AVA, you see this characteristic. I just think there's a complexity to the wines in general that, not that it's just different from other places. And since now I have learned it and know it, I find that very special, and it would be sad to see that go away. So it's a very like exocentric world way of kind of talking about it, but I think wines show that. And so once a land is really treated to just like overproduce and produce the same thing all the time, I think over time that will be lost. And it'll make a great wine, but just I don't think it'll have the Oregon essence that they can have. Sure. Yeah.
You talked a lot about kind of the seasons of wine, the cycle of wine. I'm curious if you have a favorite part of the year, a favorite part of the winemaking cycle that you look forward to the most each year.
I mean, now that it's quiet this time where nothing's growing and you can just like catch up on everything after harvest. That's a good question. My favorite cycle of the year, I don't know if it's a favorite time as much as just watching the year. I mean, we just had daylight savings, for example, but to like really be a part of the cycle, you see that you wake up and, I mean, I'm not in the vineyard barely at all, so I can't speak from the vineyard workers, but it's dark until now, 7. So 7 to 7:30, if the vineyard team wants to get out into the vineyard, they're not really starting until that time. They usually start first thing in the morning when the sun's up. As the year goes and it gets warmer, they'll start early and earlier, so it's less hot. So I think just seeing and being aware of those differences that affect the grapes is what I like about the cycles. In Utah, before the wine industry, my parents grew vegetables and all those sorts of things that have to do with the seasons. But when your crop really depends on each day, how wet the winter is, how wet the spring is, once bud break happens, if it frosts, we're in so much trouble. Or if, it's flowering and we get a huge rain, that affects us for the rest of the year. So it's not necessarily one thing, it's just that pulse of the whole year of the weather and the sun and the temperature and all that. That is what I like seeing a part of. And especially with climate change and how things have happened and changed, you really see those like hotter summers, instead of hearing it on the news or from other people, you really like tangibly go like, whoa, this is how I felt that summer, and look at these wines, we can see it in them. So it's, I would say it's more of like the whole year is a cycle instead of one moment.
So to kind of shift gears a little bit, we're going to talk a bit more about kind of the future of the industry. Start by asking what advice you would have for someone thinking of entering the Oregon wine industry today.
Come. Oregon's great. I obviously loved it and stayed after that. I do think it's a very special place, and there is a ton of talent here, and so people that want to come to Oregon and really see some amazing wines, you should come here. I think what I learned a lot through going to different vintages is when you live in one place, a really special aspect of it is that you get to be a part of it, like more than just even the people and the place, but also the wines you get to taste. So coming here and being able to be a part of this industry right now, you really get to taste amazing wines. And yes, you could probably find a lot of them on the market, but like if you were from New Zealand, you probably wouldn't be able to find that much. So come and taste the wines and see why Oregon's really starting to get finally the acclamation that it deserves.
What about your personal goals for the future? You kind of talked a little bit earlier about not necessarily knowing where you want to be for forever, for the foreseeable future. Do you have what are your personal goals then? What do you want to do in your career?
So I mean, it's so funny. So if I was to be like, the world is, you can make anything happen, which you can if you really put your mind to it. But now that me and my partner are starting a family, all of our family is still in Utah. And so I love the wine industry and I love Oregon and want to stay here as long as possible. But if we want our family closer to family, ideally in my dream world, I'd start a winery in Utah, but that's also crazy because it's not there, but possible. It's just taking that huge leap to do that in a place that doesn't have the support or infrastructure or community for that, which is all the things that I love about Oregon. So will that ever happen? I don't know. I can't say that it won't, but if we stay in Oregon, I'm extremely content currently, and I'm still learning. This job in general, from when I started as an assistant, has evolved immensely to where it is now, and I think where it is now, there is immense growth down the road. So to not stay and to see where that goes would be not giving myself the opportunity, whatever that may be. So in like the near future, I definitely see myself staying here and really strongly like keeping the Chehalem thread, like Chehalem, and I find that like very important and definitely a goal of mine for now. With that said, I also find if you're so stuck into one vision, you don't see the other things that are presented to you, whether you expect them or not. Kind of like my dad's friend in the kitchen saying, you should go into wine. You know, if I didn't look it up online, who knows what I'd be doing right now? Like I might be in Utah or something. But being able to like listen to the things around me and see what opportunities present themselves to me, whether it's something in this organization or maybe a billionaire will come to me and be like, I want you to start a winery in Utah, and I'll be like, cool, that sounds great, let's try that, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think those are kind of the goals for now in the next like 5 to 10 years.
Do you see yourself starting your own label at some point?
No, I've really dabbled with it and thought hard about it. And it would be very hard for me to keep the passion that I have for the wines at Chehalem while having a side label that I would want to do well and sell. I do get a small amount of grapes from a guy named Rich Elstrom in the Dundee Hills. It makes about like 60 gallons. And so I have fun with that and give it to friends and family. And I think that'll probably be the extent of what it is, because we get to experiment on it and there's no pressure on needing to sell it to pay for grapes or anything like that. So that's fun. I think as soon as I would start my own label with being the winemaker at Chehalem, I would find a hard pull of like, what is the difference between the two and how do I separate that while still being the type of winemaker I would want to be for both projects. So as of now, no. I'll just take my drinking wine every night.
Just Katie's wine.
Just Katie's wine, yeah, exactly. My mom keeps telling me I need to get a label for it, so when she brings it out to friends, it's not just this like shiner in Utah, like, Katie did this, and they're like, what is that? It doesn't even look like real or finished. So we'll see if that ever happens. But maybe that'd be the next big step.
That's awesome. Where do you see Chehalem specifically and the Stoller Wine Group heading in the future, and your role in that?
So Chehalem has shifted a little bit since the acquisition. Harry and Wynn were able to take with them about 48 acres that they planted up on Ribbon Ridge, so Ridgecrest, which before the acquisition, Chehalem was 100% estate grown. So we had 3 vineyards, Ridgecrest, Corral Creek, and Stoller, each in different AVAs. And I think to fulfill that kind of gap in between the time, we are shifting Chehalem more towards like a Chehalem Mountains focused brand, where, you know, kind of like Stoller is Dundee Hills. I mean, it's Dundee Hills Stoller Vineyard exclusive, but Chehalem will be more Chehalem Mountains focused. In the interim, we have bought property up on Bell Road, about 112 acres. And that's going to be planted this fall. And so the goal of Chehalem, I think, I'm pretty sure, is to become as estate grown as we can again. But until then, we will be sourcing fruit from amazing farmers within the Chehalem Mountains to kind of fill that gap. So in that interim, things will, you know, change a little bit, but I'm personally really excited because I love the Chehalem Mountains AVA, and there's so much diversity within it that I think to be able to focus there's been so much conversation as an industry of the Chehalem Mountains AVA and even breaking things out into sub-AVAs, that to really be able to focus even more on this, AVA will be amazingly educational, but also really a great expression for our wines. Our entry-level wine will now be, Chehalem Mountain wine, so from solely that AVA, which I think will be a great thing to show the world, kind of from Oregon. The Chehalem Mountains AVA can give you this range, but also this quality of wines. In the future, I do find it extremely valuable to work with estate fruit, because you do get to see that pulse a little more throughout the year. And so I really only see, like, over the course of time, those like wines becoming more tweaked or fine-tuned, but not extremely different, just more having more knowledge about them as well. So I see that kind of changing, but other than that, the labels changed. We had a brand change this year, so that's exciting. That will come out. I think with the new group, just getting some new equipment that we needed to get in the past will be extremely helpful with kind of tweaking those things just a little bit more, just to help the quality just slightly. No big changes, but just like things that will help keep things more quality driven. Yeah.
And what about the future of the industry in general, the Oregon wine industry? Where do you see it heading in the future? Where do you see it heading, and where do you kind of hope it goes?
Yeah, I think obviously the Oregon wine industry is changing, and there are a lot of players coming into Oregon that are buying land. I think depending on who comes in, it's really up to them how they choose to be a part of the community. And Oregon, for example, when Jackson family came into Oregon, they have so many wineries now and so much land, but they've done an amazing job integrating themselves into the community, and they aren't seen as this California winery that came in and really changed things. They saw the benefit of the Oregon industry and really wanted to help it in a way. I can say that I feel the same way about even the Stoller Wine Group. I am a part of a place that has now been acquired by someone larger. He was a silent partner for the duration of the whole time, but I really believe that Bill Stoller and everyone else involved in the Stoller Wine Group, their goal is to continue keeping the Oregon thread. A lot of our winemakers and viticulturists are on panels and a part of discussions of how do we keep Oregon. So I think we're kind of at a pivotal moment in these next 5 to 10 years. Things don't move extremely quickly in the wine industry, but that it can go where people come in and buy out, and it's just a big wine making country that loses its essence, or places can continue buying these really well-renowned wineries and going, we want to help you succeed even more, and what do you need from us to do that? And that's what I've seen more than the big guys coming in and trying to change what has already been established here. Even a lot of the French owners that come and buy some of the wineries, they come here because they like what Oregon has to offer, and they only want to continue that and be a part of it going forward. They're not looking to come in and reshape it. So I hope that continues, but it's a fine line, and I can see it going extremely the other way as well. So I hope that it stays where people really want to keep the essence and not lose that, and we'll see about the other guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're kind of early in your career still. So what, as you look down the road, assuming you were here for the next 20 or 30 years making wine, what are the challenges you see coming for the industry in general, and for yourself and your role specifically? What are the obstacles between Oregon and greater success?
Definitely weather. If it continues to, I mean, we've been on a heat wave for the last few vintages since 2012, and it's looking like that will continue. Every year when it says it's going to be kind of a cooler climate, it's still very hot compared to what Oregon used to be. So if that's the case going forward, I think we will come into some major conflicts of how do we farm this, what do we do? I mean, Oregon really likes the fact that a lot of their vineyards are dry farmed, that we don't need to irrigate, but our philosophy really might have to change if these hot vintages start happening. Also, the grapes that have been planted here for years are cool climate grapes, and that's what Oregon has grown on, is these cool climate varietals, but also their aspect of a cool climate varietal, and it's beautiful and lovely. And if that changes, the style of the wine will change. And how do you try to balance both? Like, how do you keep that texture or aromatics without it becoming big, jammy, hot Pinot Noirs? That's going to be a major, I think, issue. I think even for Chehalem, with some of our aromatic whites, the cool climate, cool fermentation, I think, is what really holds a lot of that in there. If it's really hot and a lot of alcohol, that's going to blow off those aromatics a lot quicker. So it's being cognizant that this could be an issue, and what do we do about it going forward? And that is scary and will be a challenge, definitely. I think other factors, Oregon's getting well known, so there is a lot of talent coming up here and a lot of people that just know what they're doing, so it's getting more and more saturated. So to find a position in Oregon, you know, if you're wanting to start out, is becoming more and more difficult and cutthroat in trying to find your own place here, which is great for the industry, but hard to like get the right people, or whoever the right people are, into it. Yeah, and then just, I think it's going to be important, if I'm in this for 20, 30 years, continuing to be on panels or staying very connected to the community. OSU, Linfield have an amazing relationship with the industry as a whole, so really trying to harness that and keep that and go, this isn't just, you know, about this wine industry, it's about the community and what that is in the bigger picture. Whether with OSU, it's really helping their science program find ways of what they're researching, excuse me, being really applicable to the day-to-day on the winery, on the wine side or whatnot. But I think as it gets bigger and more people come here, that will become even more exciting and important to stay a part of as it grows. So a few things definitely to be looking out for, but to be like hopefully not shocked when it comes that we need to do something about it.
Sure.
Or work with it or evolve with it, whatever one works best.
Sure. So that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I should have asked? Anything you'd like to mention here at the end that we didn't cover?
I don't think so. Those were great questions. Is there anything?
I think you handled it great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I think it covered a lot for sure. I mean, you guys have done this all the time. I'm sure, like I said, if there was something else that I missed, hopefully, or mentioned, that you would have asked a question about it.
Yeah, I think we got it. So
cool.
Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time and for your answers.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.